This is Boomer Life on CL 650.
Somebody should have heard me call on. Somebody should have heard me scream.
Hey, and welcome back to the show. This is Boomer Life on CL 650. I'm Zach Spencer, and today we're talking about hearing loss. We have from NexGen Hearing, Dr. Ted Venema, and not just hearing loss, but the connection between hearing loss and cognitive decline. The first couple of segments we've talked about, how they might be related, also, how the testing is done. But Dr. Venema, let's get into the studies that you can cite here that have followed patients for years and what they found out. So why don't you jump into it?
Okay, a lot of these studies were done fairly recently, like as of 2011 and 2013, 15, and even 16. So I'm going to be listing a few of these investigating teams that looked specifically at the relationship between hearing loss and cognitive decline. And the purpose, what these studies did, was they traced people over decades of their lives. So these were long studies, long-term studies that looked at a group of people over a number of years and tracked their cognitive decline. And they would often compare a group that did not have hearing loss and a group that did have hearing loss. And they'd track the rate of their cognitive decline over time.
Well, what did they find?
Well, one study there's a real researcher out there, and people can feel free to Google this person up. His last name is Lin, L-I-N, Ph.D., post-hole digger, piled higher, deeper. There you have it. At any rate,
is that how you greet each other, you PhDs?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. What did you dig today? Or Papa has dough.
Yeah.
Or, the best one is poor honest doctor.
Oh, there you go.
Anyhow, you got this team. They looked at 1,984 subjects. Now, get this: when you study a lot of people, your study gets very powerful. It gets statistically strong. And the average age of these people was 77 years. And basically, they tracked them over 6 years. And the people who had hearing loss had a 30 to 40% greater cognitive decline after 6 years. Okay. He and his team did another study of 639 subjects followed over a 12 to 18 year period. And this study was unique because it said the worse the hearing loss, the more likely the person was to develop dementia. So this was one that linked degree of hearing loss, not just whether you had hearing loss or did not have hearing loss, but for the most common type of hearing loss, which is mild to moderate. That's this typical Mrs. McGillicuddy, Mr. Jones, 75 years old, common hearing loss, moderate hearing loss like that had triple the risk of developing dementia. I mean, that's a powerful... It's kind of like,
I wonder how many of these people were married or within a relationship because, as you mentioned, social isolation. You won't have these facts, I know, because they're just citing the study. But it's just as a sort of a side note. If somebody is living on their own and is hearing loss, they're more isolated than somebody who's married and has a spouse.
I would say so.
That they're talking to regularly. So
that's true. Yeah. That makes sense. And it's really, hearing loss is an interactive sense. And compromise to the ear and hearing affects relationships. You're right in pointing that out. That's kind of an interesting thing for me to look up in the future. Some of these studies really did divide people along health lines, like degree of hearing loss, whether they had high blood pressure, whether they had diabetes, whether they were prone to depression. I mean, there's all. Well,
I'm sure there was a category for married or living.
I would think so.
Absolutely. So you're saying moderate hearing loss had triple the risk of developing dementia. That's amazing.
In that particular study. But, and all studies can be studied. In other words, tests can be tested. I mean, are they good studies or are they weak studies? I mean,
well, you've got a bunch here, though. So why don't we go through the rest and see if we can, extrapolate out some kind of trend.
I'll give you another group of people, Gergel et al., 2016. So this is just last year. 4,463 subjects aged 65 years of age without dementia. Okay, so they were all normal cognitive function. 836 of these people had hearing loss. Now, this whole group was followed for 18 years. So you got 4,000 some subjects, 800 and some have hearing loss. They're all followed for 18 years. 16.3% of those with hearing loss developed dementia over the 18 years compared to 12% who did not have the hearing loss. And then when you're looking at, what was the length of time required to develop the dementia for the hearing loss group? 10 years. For the non-hearing loss group, about 12 years. So not only the amount of people that acquired cognitive decline, but the rate at which they did was found in this study to be significantly different for the hearing loss group compared to the non-hearing loss group. Another study done by Gallagher et al., 2012, 1,057 men followed over 17 years. Those with hearing loss at the beginning of the 17-year period were twice as likely to acquire dementia. I mean, this is all, and again, I'm going to reiterate it. Please, listeners, don't think that hearing loss causes dementia.
No.
Otherwise, young people who happen to genetically have hearing loss would be walking around demented. This is just fundamentally false. We really need to underline the word relationship as opposed to cause.
Now, Dr. Venema, before we go on, I just have a quick question about, your interaction with patients. Is it harder to get men to go and get a hearing aid or women?
Men.
They're just more stubborn that way.
Yep. More macho. Don't want to. Usually it's the wives dragging the man in to get a hearing test. That's the common scenario. Now, it's not true that women don't have hearing loss because I fit lots of women, elderly women who've had hearing loss. I mean, it's common too. And it's not like more men have hearing loss than women, but more men have worked in noise sociologically than women.
Sure.
And especially the seniors of our day when hearing protection wasn't as monitored as it is today. So noise-induced hearing loss is the second most common cause of hearing loss. After aging, it comes number 2.
All right, so I just as an aside, because that last study by Gallagher was about men followed over 17 years. Anyway, go on to your next study.
Yeah, okay. These people let's see, what's another study here with hundreds of people. I can't believe it. Another group of people studied by authors by the last name of Deal, as in let's make a deal, D-E-A-L, in 2016. 387 high-functioning adults aged 70 to 79 years, followed for 9 years. 20% had moderately severe hearing loss to moderately severe, and about 40 or 38% just had mild hearing loss. Hearing loss was found to be associated with a higher risk of acquiring dementia, poorer memory performance, but there was no association between the hearing loss and the rate of the cognitive decline, as in the previous mentioned study. So some studies had slightly different findings. It's just you're getting, there's no real conclusive evidence that the hearing loss caused the cognitive decline, but definitely it's a risk factor associated. And common sense would say that would agree. Isolation doesn't do anybody any good. The last group I'll mention here was done by a group by the head author was Fisher, F-I-S-C-H-E-R, in 2016. 1,187 adults with no cognitive impairment, normal functioning people, average age 66.7 years, followed over 10 years of time. 85% with hearing loss, 91% with visual impairment, 76% with olfactory smelling impairment, like inability to smell. Those percentage of people in each of those groups did not develop cognitive impairment over the 10 years of study. And that study just concluded, you know what? All sensory systems are linked to cognitive decline. Not particularly hearing loss, it's just that the entire brain is aging.
So even your sense of smell deteriorates over time?
Yes, I guess it does. I guess. And as we all know, smell and taste are linked together pretty well. Mm-hmm. That's if you can't smell, if your sniffer isn't working very well, your taste buds are going to definitely be affected. And
we've all had that when we've had a cold. You can't taste this chicken soup, but Because you can't smell it.
Smell is a very odd sense. It's a very primitive sense. And people don't understand the sense of smell as well as we do with vision and hearing loss. But
well, it's interesting because they say the greatest trigger of memory is smell.
Yeah, that's true.
This smell reminds me of my old house, or this reminds me of our cabin in the woods, or whatever.
Yep, and it links with a very primitive part of your brain, your limbic system, your emotion system, and memory is it's a really unique sense. You're right. You just smell something and it's like, I haven't smelled that in years. That's my grandmother's bread or whatever.
Yeah. So these studies, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that you just cited, kind of all have a bit of a trend here, I would suggest. I'm not going to speak for you, but what do you think of this group of 7 studies sort of shows us?
I think they all show that I think they all really strongly show a relationship between hearing loss and dementia. None of them show cause and effect connection between hearing loss and dementia, but they all point in one direction, in a major compass direction, and that is, if you've got hearing loss, do something about it. It's almost a line that I'm going to suggest that NexGen uses in their stores. Do something about it. It's like, because when you can be wearing hearing aids and when you can hear better, common sense is going to dictate that your rate of cognitive decline will be less severe because you're more kept in the game of life. So much of research, they get all technical and people get lost in it, but basically a lot of it is just pointing at common sense. It's the science of common sense. They're just applying science to what everybody knows, what you can intuit just by yourself.
Dr. Ted Venema is our guest from NexGen Hearing, and we're talking about hearing loss and cognitive decline. And we're going to pick up our conversation about that next, right here on CL 650.
Celebrating the baby boomer lifestyle. This is Boomer Life on CL 650.